At 58 years old, I thought I understood family loyalty. I thought I knew the difference between love and manipulation. I was wrong about both. What started as helping my younger sister plan her dream wedding turned into the most expensive lesson of my life. $65,000 expensive. And the worst part? The betrayal came from the person I had spent decades protecting, supporting, and believing in. This is the story of how I learned that sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones you would do anything for. I was reviewing quarterly reports when my phone rang that Tuesday afternoon in October. The caller ID showed a Denver number I did not recognize, and something in my gut told me to answer. Carmen Martinez, Elena's wedding planner, spoke in that practiced professional tone that barely masked her discomfort. She told me there had been some changes to the guest list. My name, she explained carefully, was no longer on the invitation roster. But my $65,000 contribution, that was still very much expected and appreciated. I sat there in my Seattle office surrounded by the financial planning certificates and family photos that defined my carefully constructed life, trying to process what I had just heard. My younger sister had uninvited me from her own wedding, the wedding I was paying for. The wedding that had consumed my thoughts, my bank account, and apparently, my dignity for the past 8 months. Carmen continued talking about catering adjustments and venue logistics, but her words became background noise. My hands started trembling as the reality sank in. Elena had actually done it. After 24 years of being the responsible older sister, the one who swooped in during every crisis with my checkbook and unconditional support, she had finally crossed a line I never thought she would dare approach. The irony was not lost on me. Here I was, a successful financial advisor who spent her days helping clients make smart money decisions and set healthy boundaries, yet I had become the textbook example of everything I warned them against. I had enabled, I had overextended. I had confused love with financial rescue again and again and again. When Carmen finished her scripted explanation and hung up, I stared out my office window at the Seattle skyline. The Space Needle looked smaller from up here on the 40th floor, and I wondered if this was how Elena saw me now too. Useful from a distance, but ultimately disposable once she had what she needed. My assistant knocked and peered in, probably wondering why I looked like I had seen a ghost. I waved her away and locked my door. For the first time in 3 years since David's funeral, I allowed myself to cry at work. Not the dignified tears of grief I had learned to manage, but the ugly, raw sobs of someone who had just realized they had been played by the person they loved most in the world. The wedding was in 6 weeks. The money was already transferred, and I was apparently no longer welcome to witness what my life savings had purchased. To understand how I ended up bankrolling my own humiliation, you need to know about Elena and me. We are 24 years apart, which means I was already in college when she took her first steps. Our parents had given up on having more children after fertility struggles in their 30s, so Elena's arrival felt like a miracle baby blessing our family. From the moment she could talk, Elena learned that tears got results. Mom and Dad, exhausted from years of disappointment and already in their 40s, gave her everything she wanted. Meanwhile, I became the built-in babysitter, the homework helper, the one who drove her to dance classes and picked up the pieces when she inevitably quit. By the time I graduated with my finance degree and started building my career, Elena was the family princess, beautiful, charming, and completely convinced that the world owed her whatever she desired. When she struggled in high school, I paid for tutoring. When she wanted to try modeling in Los Angeles at 19, I covered her apartment deposit and living expenses for 6 months until she decided it was not for her. The pattern was established early. Elena would dream big, I would fund the dream, and when it inevitably fell apart, I would be there to catch her financially and emotionally. She cycled through careers like seasonal wardrobes, photography, interior design, yoga instruction, food, blogging, personal training. Each pivot required startup costs, new equipment, certification courses. Each failure brought tearful phone calls about being misunderstood and unsupported by everyone except her devoted big sister. Mom always took Elena's side, reminding me that I was blessed with financial success and should be grateful to help family. Dad, before he passed 5 years ago, would quietly slip me cash to help offset some of Elena's expenses, but he never wanted to upset the family dynamic by addressing the real problem. When David died suddenly of a heart attack, Elena's support lasted exactly through the funeral reception. Within a month, she was back to calling with financial emergencies, seemingly oblivious to the fact that I was drowning in my own grief and trying to rebuild my life as a widow at 55. She moved back to Denver 2 years ago to be closer to Mom, who was showing early signs of dementia. I thought maybe this time would be different, that caring for our mother would give Elena the purpose and responsibility she had always lacked. Instead, she moved into Mom's house, convinced her to sign over power of attorney, and started treating our mother's Social Security and retirement savings like her personal allowance. That is when she met Robert at a coffee shop in Capitol Hill. Within 3 months, they were engaged and Elena was planning the wedding of the century. The first call came in February, barely a week after Elena announced her engagement. She was bubbling with excitement about Robert, about their future, about the dream wedding she had been planning since she was 12. The venue she had found was perfect. She gushed an elegant mountain resort in Aspen that could accommodate 200 guests. There was just one tiny problem. The deposit was $30,000, and it was due by the end of the month, or they would lose their spot. Robert's marketing firm was doing well, but they were saving for a house down payment. Elena's latest venture, a lifestyle blog about sustainable living, was still in its infancy. Could her wonderful, successful big sister maybe help out? Just this once, she would pay me back as soon as the blog took off. Or maybe Robert could cover it after his next promotion. I should have said no. Every financial planning bone in my body screamed that this was a terrible idea. But Elena's voice carried that breathless hope I remembered from when she was little, asking if I really thought she could be a ballerina or an astronaut, or whatever impossible dream had captured her imagination that week. David had been gone less than 2 years, and the house felt so empty. My retirement accounts were healthy, my mortgage was paid off, and what was I saving all this money for? Anyway, Elena was the only family I had left who still needed me. Mom barely recognized me on good days, and Elena was talking about giving me a special role in the ceremony, maybe having me do a reading or walk her partway down the aisle, since Dad was not there. So I transferred the $30,000, telling myself it was a wedding gift, a generous one. Yes, but what is money compared to family happiness? That should have been the end of it. But Elena's vision kept expanding. The flowers needed to be upgraded because the original package looked cheap in photos. The photographer she had found was amazing, but required a larger deposit to secure the date. The catering needed enhancement because Robert's family was very sophisticated and she wanted to make a good impression. Each request came with detailed explanations about why this particular expense was crucial and why it could not wait. Each check I wrote was supposedly the last one needed. Each time, Elena promised this would make the wedding absolutely perfect and was not that worth it for her special day. By August, I had contributed $65,000 to what Elena called our family celebration. The wedding had morphed into a 3-day affair with a welcome dinner, the ceremony and reception, and a farewell brunch. My role had somehow shrunk from doing a reading to simply being a guest, but Elena assured me I would have the place of honor at the family table. After Carmen's call, I sat in my office for 2 hours, trying to find the courage to dial Elena's number. My hands kept shaking every time I reached for my phone. Part of me hoped there had been some terrible misunderstanding, that Carmen had gotten her wires crossed, or Elena had no idea what her wedding planner had done. But deep down, I knew better. Elena had always been calculated in her cruelty, even as a child. This was not an accident or a miscommunication. This was deliberate. When I finally called, Elena answered on the first ring with that bright, cheerful voice she used when she wanted something. The same tone she had used 8 months ago when she first asked for wedding money. I told her about Carmen's call, my voice barely steady. There was a pause that stretched too long, and then Elena's tone shifted completely. Gone was the warmth, replaced by something cold and dismissive that I had never heard from her before. She said she was sorry I had to hear it from Carmen, but yes, there had been changes to the guest list. The venue had capacity restrictions they had not anticipated, and difficult decisions had to be made. She and Robert had decided to keep things intimate, just their closest friends and immediate family. I reminded her that I was immediate family. I was her sister, her only sister, the one who had raised her when our parents were too tired and too old, the one who had paid for this wedding. Elena's laugh was sharp and bitter. She told me that is exactly why I could not be there. Robert's family was very image conscious, very successful, and they had asked uncomfortable questions about our family dynamic. How would it look? She asked if her guests knew that her older sister was essentially paying for their good time. It would be embarrassing for everyone involved. She made it sound like she was protecting me from social awkwardness, but her words cut like glass. I was an embarrassment. My generosity was shameful. My love was something to be hidden from her new sophisticated in-laws. When I asked about the money, Elena's voice turned ice cold. She reminded me that I had given those contributions freely as gifts. There were no contracts, no legal obligations. If I tried to make trouble now, so close to the wedding date, I would only be proving that I was exactly the kind of difficult family member she was trying to shield Robert from. The conversation ended with Elena telling me she hoped I would understand that this was what was best for everyone, and maybe we could have lunch sometime after they got back from their honeymoon in Italy. After Elena hung up on me, I found myself staring at the framed photo on my desk from her high school graduation. There she was at 18, radiant in her cap and gown, with me beaming proudly beside her. I remembered that day so clearly, because it was the first time someone had mistaken me for her mother instead of her sister. I did not correct them. Part of me had always felt more like Elena's mother than her sibling anyway. The truth was, this pattern of taking and discarding had been Elena's signature move since childhood. When she was 7 and I was 31, she convinced me to buy her the most expensive American Girl doll for Christmas. She played with it obsessively for 3 weeks, carrying it everywhere, introducing it to strangers, making me help her create elaborate storylines and tea parties. Then she discovered her friend Madison had gotten a different doll, one with longer hair and a better wardrobe. Suddenly, my carefully chosen gift became worthless. She shoved it in her closet and refused to acknowledge it existed, no matter how much money I had spent or how excited she had been just days before. This same cycle repeated with piano lessons, horseback riding, art classes, summer camps. I would fund Elena's passionate new interest, watch her throw herself into it completely, and then witness her inevitable boredom and abandonment when something shinier appeared. Each time I told myself this would be different. Each time I was wrong. But here's what really haunts me. I enabled every bit of it. When Elena would lose interest in her expensive hobbies, instead of letting her experience natural consequences, I would quietly donate the equipment or absorb the financial loss. When she would hurt friends with her fickleness, I would make excuses about her being young or overwhelmed. I realize now that many of you watching this probably recognize these patterns from your own families. Maybe you are the giver, always wondering why your generosity never seems to be enough. Or maybe you are watching someone you love get taken advantage of, wanting to shake them and make them see what is so obvious to everyone else. The hardest part is admitting that I was not just Elena's victim. I was her accomplice. Every time I rescued her from the consequences of her choices, I taught her that her actions did not matter because someone would always clean up her messes. I created the monster that eventually devoured me. Sitting in my office that October afternoon, surrounded by evidence of my professional success, but drowning in personal failure, I finally understood something David had tried to tell me years ago. He had gently suggested that my relationship with Elena was not helping either of us grow. I had dismissed his concerns as jealousy, convinced that he just did not understand family loyalty. Looking back, I can pinpoint exactly when Elena's wedding requests shifted from expensive to outrageous. It was late June, about a month after I had already contributed $40,000. She called me during my lunch break, sobbing hysterically. Robert's mother had just seen the preliminary wedding plans, and according to Elena, she had made some very pointed comments about the level of elegance expected for her son's wedding. The flowers were not sophisticated enough. The band was too small for proper dancing. The menu lacked the kind of refined options that Robert's business associates would expect. Through her tears, Elena painted a picture of potential humiliation. Robert's family was old Denver money. She explained the kind of people who summered in Martha's Vineyard and sent their children to boarding schools I had never heard of. If this wedding did not meet their standards, it would affect Robert's career prospects and their future together. She needed another $15,000 immediately. The florist required payment in full to upgrade to the premium package. The caterer wanted a deposit for the enhanced menu. The band had agreed to expand to a full orchestra, but only if they received confirmation by the end of the week. What made this conversation different was Elena's desperation. She was not just asking, she was begging. She told me I was the only person in the world who could save her marriage before it even began. Robert's family already thought she was beneath their son socially. If this wedding was anything less than spectacular, it would confirm their worst assumptions about her background and worthiness. I found myself caught between my financial training and my family loyalty. $15,000 would bring my total contribution to $55,000 more than many people's annual salaries. But Elena was describing a social catastrophe that could destroy her relationship and her future happiness. Against every professional instinct I possessed, I agreed to the additional funding. But this time, I insisted on speaking directly with the vendors to ensure the money was going where Elena claimed it would go. That request triggered an explosion of indignation. Elena accused me of not trusting her, of treating her like a child, of making her feel humiliated in front of her wedding vendors. She reminded me that she was 34 years old and perfectly capable of managing her own wedding arrangements without her controlling older sister micromanaging every detail. The conversation ended with Elena in tears, telling me that if I could not support her wedding with complete faith and generosity, maybe I did not belong there at all. At the time, I thought she was just stressed and overwhelmed. I had no idea she was already planning my exclusion. My best friend Sarah had been watching this unfold with growing concern since spring. We had been having our monthly dinner at our favorite restaurant in Pike Place Market when I mentioned Elena's latest request for additional wedding funds. Sarah set down her wine glass and gave me that look I had learned to dread over our 30-year friendship. She asked me point blank how much money I had given Elena so far. When I told her it was approaching $60,000, Sarah's expression shifted from concern to something closer to alarm. She reminded me that Elena had never paid me back for any of the previous loans over the years. Not the modeling adventure, not the photography equipment, not the yoga teacher certification, nothing. Sarah pressed further, asking uncomfortable questions I had been avoiding. Had Elena ever acknowledged the sacrifices I was making? Did she show genuine gratitude or just ask for more? When was the last time Elena had done something meaningful for me without being asked? I found myself making excuses, explaining that Elena showed appreciation in different ways. She sent thoughtful texts sometimes. She always remembered my birthday. She had promised to have me prominently featured in the wedding photos so I would always be part of her special memories. But even as I said these things, they sounded hollow. Sarah pointed out that Elena had not visited me once since David's funeral, despite having plenty of free time and my repeated invitations. When I had mentioned feeling lonely during the anniversary of David's death, Elena had sent a brief sympathy text and then immediately launched into excitement about her engagement party plans. The warning signs had been there all along, but I had trained myself not to see them. Elena's phone calls always began with a few minutes of superficial interest in my life before pivoting to whatever she needed. Her social media posts never mentioned our relationship or acknowledged my support, despite detailed gratitude toward friends who had contributed far less to her happiness. Most telling of all, Elena had never introduced me to Robert. 9 months into their relationship, 3 months into their engagement, and I had never even had a phone conversation with the man my sister was marrying. When I had suggested meeting him during one of my Denver visits to see Mom, Elena always had excuses. He was traveling for work, or they had plans with his friends, or it just was not a good time. Sarah suggested something that made my stomach drop. Maybe Elena was ashamed of me. Not because I was not successful or accomplished, but because my generosity highlighted her inability to support herself. My financial contributions made her look dependent and immature to Robert and his sophisticated family. That night, I lay awake thinking about all the times Elena had asked me not to mention our financial arrangements to other people. She had always framed it as protecting my privacy. But now, I wondered if she was protecting her own image instead. The breaking point came in early September, about 6 weeks before the wedding. I was visiting Mom in Denver, something I tried to do monthly since her dementia had worsened. Elena lived in the same house now, supposedly caring for her, but I noticed Mom seemed more confused and agitated than usual. During my visit, Elena mentioned casually that she and Robert were looking at houses in Cherry Creek, one of Denver's most expensive neighborhoods. She showed me listings on her phone with the excitement of a child showing off Christmas presents. Colonial mansions with circular driveways, modern estates with infinity pools, properties that cost more than most people would earn in a lifetime. I asked the obvious question: how were they planning to afford a $2 million house on Robert's marketing salary and Elena's non-existent income from her lifestyle blog? Elena's answer left me speechless. She explained that Robert's parents were helping with the down payment, and they had qualified for a jumbo mortgage based on their combined future earning potential. But the monthly payments would be tight until Elena's blog took off or she found her next career opportunity. She wondered, with that familiar, hopeful tone, if I might consider helping them with the house payments for the first year or two, just until they got established. It would be like an investment in their future and in mine too, since I would always be welcome to visit and even stay in the guest suite when I came to see Mom. I felt something snap inside me. Here was Elena living rent-free in our mother's house, asking me to fund not just her wedding, but her entire lifestyle indefinitely. She had already spent $65,000 of my money on a single party, and now she wanted me to subsidize her mortgage so she could live in a mansion she had not earned. When I told her this was absolutely not happening, Elena's mask slipped completely. She accused me of being jealous of her happiness, of resenting her youth and beauty, and promising future. She said I was trying to control her life with money because my own life was so empty and sad. The cruelest cut came when she suggested that maybe I was clinging to her because I was afraid of being alone. David was gone. Mom barely recognized me anymore. And Elena was moving on to build a real family with Robert. If I could not be supportive of their success, maybe I was the problem in our relationship. That night alone in my hotel room, I called Sarah in tears. For the first time, I admitted out loud that I thought Elena was using me, not just for money, but as an emotional dumping ground for all her insecurities and failures. I was her safety net, her backup plan, her personal ATM machine disguised as a loving sister. The morning after Carmen's call, informing me of my wedding banishment, I did something I had never done before. I made an appointment with my attorney, not for estate planning or business matters, but to discuss my own family. James Morrison had handled David's estate and helped me navigate the legal complexities of widowhood. He was a kind man in his 60s who had seen enough family drama to remain unshocked by most situations. But when I explained Elena's wedding situation, even he raised an eyebrow. I laid out the timeline for him methodically, the way I would present a financial plan to a client. 8 months of contributions, totaling $65,000. No written agreements, no promissory notes, no formal documentation of any kind. Just bank transfers and canceled checks with memo lines, like Elena's wedding and for Elena flowers. James listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes on his yellow legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his leather chair and asked the question I had been dreading. What exactly did I want him to do about it? The truth was, I did not know. Part of me wanted to explore legal options for recovering the money. Another part of me just wanted someone in authority to tell me I was not crazy, that what Elena had done was genuinely wrong, and not just a misunderstanding between sisters. James explained the legal realities with gentle frankness. Without written agreements, the money I had given Elena would likely be considered gifts in any court proceeding. Even if I could prove some kind of oral contract or implied agreement, the costs of litigation would probably exceed any potential recovery. Family court battles were expensive, emotionally devastating, and rarely produced satisfying outcomes for anyone involved. But then, he said something that changed everything. He told me that just because I could not sue Elena did not mean I was powerless. I still had control over my own money, my own choices, and my own boundaries going forward. James suggested I think carefully about what I really wanted to achieve. Was I seeking financial recovery, or was I trying to teach Elena a lesson about consequences? Did I want to maintain some kind of relationship with my sister, or was I prepared to accept that this might permanently damage our family connection? He also reminded me of something I had forgotten in my emotional turmoil. Elena's wedding was still 6 weeks away. The vendors had been paid, but they were expecting Elena to fulfill her obligations to them. If she suddenly could not meet her financial commitments because her funding source disappeared, that would create its own form of natural consequences. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a spark of something I had not experienced in months' personal agency. I was not just Elena's victim or her enabler. I was a grown woman with options, resources, and the power to make my own decisions about my future. That evening, I sat in my home office surrounded by financial documents and family photos, crafting the most important email I had ever written. I must have started and deleted it 20 times, trying to find the right balance between firmness and love, between boundaries and bridges. The message I finally sent was simple and clear. I told Elena that I had learned about my exclusion from her wedding, and while I respected her right to invite whomever she chose, I could no longer participate financially in an event where I was not welcome. I was immediately stopping all payments to wedding vendors and would be contacting them directly to clarify that I was no longer responsible for any outstanding balances. I gave Elena 48 hours to decide what mattered more, having me as her sister or having me as her ATM. If she wanted to repair our relationship, she needed to call me, personally apologize, sincerely, and reinstate my invitation with the respect and place of honor I deserved as her closest family member. If she chose Robert's family's approval over our sisterhood, I would respect that decision, but would no longer fund it. The email concluded with something I had never said to Elena before I loved her unconditionally, but I would no longer enable her unconditionally. Those were two different things, and I was finally mature enough to understand the difference. I want to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between keeping peace and keeping your dignity, where standing up for yourself meant risking a relationship you had cherished your entire life? If you have, please share your story in the comments below. Sometimes, knowing we are not alone in these impossible choices makes all the difference. After sending the email, I did something I had not done since David died. I turned off my phone and ran a hot bath. For 2 hours, I soaked in lavender-scented water and allowed myself to imagine what my life might look like if I stopped organizing it around Elena's needs and crises. I thought about the vacations I had postponed because Elena might need emergency funds. The retirement dreams I had scaled back to maintain my sister rescue budget. The social invitations I had declined because I was emotionally drained from managing Elena's latest catastrophe. For the first time in decades, I entertained the radical possibility that my money might actually belong to me, that my emotional energy might be better invested in relationships that offered mutual support and genuine affection. That saying no to Elena might mean saying yes to a version of myself I had forgotten existed. When I finally checked my phone the next morning, there were 17 missed calls from Elena and a series of increasingly frantic text messages that told me everything I needed to know about her priorities. Elena's text messages read like a psychological progression through the stages of manipulation. The first few were panicked and pleading, begging me not to destroy her wedding over a simple misunderstanding. She insisted that the guest list changes were temporary, that she had been planning to surprise me with a special invitation all along. By message number 8, the tone shifted to anger. She accused me of being vindictive and cruel, of deliberately timing my withdrawal to cause maximum damage. She reminded me that vendors required notice periods and that my sudden cancellation would leave her scrambling to find replacement funding with less than 6 weeks to go. The final messages were pure emotional warfare. Elena threatened to cut off my access to Mom, claiming that my stress was making our mother's condition worse. She said Robert's family had been right about our family being dysfunctional, and my behavior was proving their point. She ended by telling me that if I destroyed her wedding, she would never forgive me, and I would die alone and unloved, just like I deserved. Reading those messages felt like watching someone I had loved my entire life transform into a stranger. This was not wedding stress or momentary panic. This was Elena revealing who she really was when her carefully constructed facade fell away. But the real explosion came when Elena called Mom. Our mother's dementia made her vulnerable to emotional manipulation, and Elena knew exactly how to weaponize that vulnerability. She told Mom that I was trying to ruin her wedding out of jealousy, that I had always resented Elena's beauty and youth, and that I was using money as a weapon to control the family. When Mom called me sobbing and confused, begging me to please not hurt Elena's special day, I felt something break inside my chest. Elena had turned our mother into another weapon against me, using her illness and confusion to guilt me into submission. Mom's voice was shaky and small as she reminded me how much she had looked forward to seeing Elena in her wedding dress. She asked why I was being so mean to my baby sister, why I could not just be happy for her like a good big sister should be. Through her tears, she told me that Elena was all she had left, and if I drove her away, what would happen to her? That phone call was perhaps the cruelest thing Elena had ever done, because it forced me to choose between protecting myself and protecting our mother's peace of mind. Elena knew I would never explain the full truth to Mom, never burden her with the complexity of our relationship or the extent of Elena's financial manipulation. After I hung up with Mom, I sat in my kitchen and grieved not just for my relationship with Elena, but for the family I had thought we were. We had never been the loving, supportive unit I had imagined. We had been a dysfunction system, with me as the enabler, Elena as the taker, and Mom as the unwitting accomplice. The next 48 hours tested every boundary I had ever tried to set. Elena recruited flying monkeys from every corner of our extended family. Cousins I had not spoken to in years suddenly called with concerns about my mental health. Distant relatives sent Facebook messages suggesting I was having some kind of breakdown and needed professional help. Elena had crafted a narrative that painted me as the unstable older sister who had snapped under the pressure of widowhood and was now taking out my bitterness on her innocent younger sibling. She had shared carefully edited versions of our conversations, omitting her cruelty while highlighting my ultimatums and financial threats. The worst call came from my aunt, Patricia, Mom's sister, who lived in Phoenix and had always been Elena's favorite relative. Patricia accused me of financial abuse, of using my wealth to manipulate and control Elena's life choices. She suggested that my grief over David had warped my judgment and that I was jealous of Elena's happiness because I could not have my own. Patricia's words stung because they contained just enough truth to burrow under my skin. I was grieving. I was lonely. I did sometimes feel envious of Elena's easy confidence and unlimited optimism. But Patricia's diagnosis missed the crucial point. My financial support had always been voluntary and generous, not controlling or conditional. The turning point came when I stopped defending myself and started asking questions instead. I asked Patricia exactly how much money she thought was reasonable for a sister to contribute to a wedding. I asked if she would be comfortable funding a $65,000 celebration she was not invited to attend. I asked what advice she would give her own daughter if she found herself in my situation. Patricia's answers grew increasingly uncomfortable as she realized she was defending the indefensible. She suggested that maybe Elena had made some mistakes, but family was family, and weddings were stressful times that brought out the worst in everyone. But I was done making excuses for Elena's behavior. This was not wedding stress or family drama. This was a pattern of exploitation that had been decades in the making, and I was finally mature enough to recognize it. The real test of my resolve came when Elena played her final card. She called me directly, abandoning the angry text messages and family intermediaries for one last attempt at manipulation. Her voice was soft and broken, the little girl voice she had used since childhood when she wanted something impossible. She told me she had been thinking about our conversation and realized she had made terrible mistakes. She was sorry for excluding me, sorry for taking my generosity for granted, sorry for everything that had gone wrong between us. All she wanted, she said, was her big sister standing beside her on the most important day of her life. I did not attend Elena's wedding, But I know exactly what happened because social media made sure I could not escape it. The day I had funded but was not welcome to witness played out in real time across Instagram, Facebook, and Snapchat stories shared by guests who had no idea about the family drama behind their beautiful celebration. The mountain resort looked stunning in the October sunshine, exactly as elegant and sophisticated as Elena had promised. The flowers were indeed spectacular cascading arrangements of white orchids and roses that must have cost a fortune. The guests looked appropriately wealthy and well-dressed, the kind of people who belonged in magazine spreads about perfect weddings. Elena looked radiant in her dress, a custom creation that had required 3 separate fittings and cost more than many people's cars. She glowed with happiness as she walked down the aisle to Robert, who waited for her in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. The ceremony was flawless, the reception elegant, the photography magazine quality. From the outside, it was everything Elena had dreamed of. The wedding that would impress Robert's family, establish her social credentials, and launch her into the sophisticated Denver society she had always wanted to join. But I noticed things in those photos that probably escaped other viewers. Elena's smile was brilliant, but brittle, the kind of expression that required constant maintenance. Robert looked handsome, but distant, going through the motions of romantic devotion without the natural warmth of a man genuinely in love. Most telling of all were the guest photos. Robert's family occupied the prominent tables, looking appropriately pleased with the lavish celebration. But Elena's side of the reception looked sparse, filled mostly with her college friends and a few distant relatives who had made the trip to Colorado. The family table, where I should have been sitting, held Mom looking confused and frail in a dress I recognized from Elena's closet. My empty chair had been removed entirely, as if I had never existed. Elena had gotten exactly what she wanted, a wedding that erased any evidence of the financial support that made it possible. I spent that Saturday working in my garden, something I had been neglecting for months while obsessing over Elena's wedding drama. There was something deeply satisfying about digging in the soil, planting bulbs that would bloom next spring, creating beauty that did not depend on anyone else's approval or gratitude. Around the time Elena was probably cutting her cake, I was on my hands and knees planting daffodils along my garden border. The physical work felt healing after months of emotional turmoil. I was investing in my own future happiness instead of funding someone else's fantasy. That evening, as Elena's reception wound down in Colorado, I treated myself to dinner at my favorite restaurant. I ordered the expensive wine, chose the premium entree, and left a generous tip because I could afford to be generous with people who appreciated it. The silence that followed Elena's wedding was deafening. For 8 months, my phone had buzzed constantly with wedding updates, vendor questions, family drama, and Elena's endless requests for input and funding. Suddenly, my days felt eerily quiet. Elena and Robert left for their Italian honeymoon the day after the wedding, and their social media feeds filled with pictures of romantic dinners, in Rome gondola rides in Venice, and sunset walks along the Amalfi Coast. The carefree happiness in those photos stung more than I expected. She looked like someone who had never worried about money or family obligations, never lost sleep over vendor payments or guest list politics. 3 weeks into their honeymoon, I received a single text message from Elena. She thanked me for my contributions to the wedding and said she hoped we could move forward as a family. No apology for excluding me, no acknowledgement of the pain she had caused. No recognition that anything had been wrong with her behavior. Just a polite thank you note, as if I had been a distant acquaintance who had sent a wedding gift. The real consequences became clear when they returned to Denver. Elena's lifestyle blog, which had supposedly been on the verge of major success, remained stagnant with the same few hundred followers she had had for months. Robert's promised promotion never materialized. The expensive Cherry Creek house they had been planning to buy remained a fantasy without my financial backing. Within 6 months, cracks began showing in their perfect marriage. Elena's social media posts became less frequent and more forced. The romantic couple photos were replaced by solo shots and vague, inspirational quotes about overcoming challenges and staying strong during difficult times. Mom's condition continued deteriorating, and Elena struggled to manage her care alone. The luxury lifestyle she had been planning required 2 substantial incomes, not 1 marketing salary, and a failed blog. She had burned the bridge to her primary financial support system for a wedding that lasted 1 day. But the most revealing development came through our cousin Maria, who remained neutral in our family drama. Maria mentioned during a casual phone call that Elena had been asking questions about my financial situation. She wanted to know if I was still angry, if I missed her, if I might be open to rebuilding our relationship. Elena was testing the waters, trying to determine whether her financial safety net might still be available if she approached reconciliation carefully. She was not missing me as her sister. She was missing me as her backup plan. The realization that Elena viewed our relationship primarily through a financial lens was both heartbreaking and liberating. It meant I could stop wondering if I had made the right choice and start focusing on building a life that did not revolve around rescue missions. The hardest lesson I learned through this ordeal was recognizing my own role in creating the dynamic that eventually destroyed us. For decades, I had convinced myself that my financial generosity was an expression of love, but the truth was more complicated and uncomfortable. My rescue missions had served my own psychological needs as much as Elena's financial ones. Being the successful sister, the reliable one, the family problem solver had become central to my identity. Elena's crises made me feel important and needed in a way that my professional success never quite achieved. When David was alive, he had provided the emotional intimacy and appreciation I craved. After his death, I had unconsciously tried to fill that void through Elena's dependency. Her gratitude, however shallow and temporary, felt like love to someone drowning in grief and loneliness. But enabling Elena had not just hurt her development as an independent adult. It had stunted my own emotional growth. I had spent so much energy managing her life that I had forgotten how to fully live my own. My social calendar revolved around her emergencies. My financial planning accommodated her unpredictable needs. My retirement dreams were scaled back to maintain her rescue fund. The wedding crisis forced me to confront some brutal truths about family dynamics. Love and enabling are not the same thing. Generosity without boundaries becomes exploitation. Good intentions do not excuse harmful outcomes. And sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for someone is to let them experience the natural consequences of their choices. I also learned that financial abuse is not always dramatic or obvious. It can look like family loyalty, sisterly devotion, and generous love. The manipulation can be so gradual and wrapped in such appealing packaging that you do not recognize it until you are completely drained. Elena had never held a gun to my head or stolen money from my accounts. She had used guilt obligation, emotional manipulation, and my own need to be needed. She had convinced me that my worth as a sister depended on my willingness to fund her dreams, and I had believed her because it gave my life a sense of purpose and meaning. Breaking free from that pattern required mourning not just the relationship I had lost, but the version of myself I had been clinging to. The Margaret who defined herself through her usefulness to others, who measured love by financial sacrifice, who believed that saying no meant being selfish. The process was agonizing but necessary. I had to learn that my value as a person existed independently of my bank account, that real relationships survive financial boundaries, that self-respect sometimes requires disappointing people you love. Most importantly, I discovered that the fear of being alone had made me tolerate treatment that no one should accept from family or friends. It has been 18 months since Elena's wedding, and I am writing this story from a very different place than where I started. The woman who once organized her entire life around her sister's needs has learned to prioritize her own dreams and boundaries. The $65,000 I will never see again taught me the most expensive lesson of my life, but it was worth every penny. I learned that I am not responsible for other people's happiness, success, or life choices. I learned that real love sometimes looks like disappointing people. And I learned that my worth is not measured by my usefulness to others. My relationship with Mom has actually improved since I stopped enabling Elena's manipulation. I visit Denver more frequently now, but I stay in hotels instead of with Elena. Mom and I have found a peaceful rhythm in our conversations, and I have arranged for professional caregivers to supplement Elena's efforts without going through my sister as an intermediary. Elena and I have not spoken directly since her thank you text, though I hear updates through family members. Her marriage is reportedly struggling, her blog never gained traction, and she has had to take a part-time retail job to help make ends meet. The sophisticated Denver society life she had imagined has not materialized, and Robert's family apparently lost interest once the wedding excitement faded. I feel sadness about her situation, but not the desperate urge to rescue her that would have consumed me 2 years ago. Elena is 35 years old, intelligent and capable. If she chooses to learn from her mistakes and build genuine skills and relationships, she will be fine. If she chooses to continue looking for someone else to fund her dreams, that is no longer my concern. My own life has expanded in ways I never expected. I have traveled to places I had always wanted to see, but never prioritized because Elena might need emergency funds. I have strengthened friendships that had been neglected during my crisis management years. I have even started dating again, something that seemed impossible in the immediate aftermath of David's death. Most surprisingly, I have discovered that I actually enjoy my own company. The woman who once feared being alone has learned to savor solitude. My house feels peaceful instead of empty. My bank account reflects my priorities instead of someone else's crises. If you are watching this and recognizing yourself in my story, please know that it is never too late to set boundaries and reclaim your life. Family dysfunction can feel normal when you are in the middle of it, but you deserve relationships built on mutual respect and genuine affection, not financial obligation. Your money belongs to you. Your energy belongs to you. Your love should be cherished, not exploited. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is step back and let people learn to stand on their own. Thank you for letting me share this story. If it resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more real stories about family boundaries and finding your strength. And remember, you are worth more than what you can provide for others.